yes, everyone can unmute if you'd like to talk about any of the topics that Anne has brought up. Also, I took a picture of that last slide, so I can post that and send it out to make sure that we know how to reach you. I think this is a wonderful program. I had no idea it was out there. And certainly a lot of us see these invasive plants, can recognize them pretty easily. And we're out in nature. So I think we're good candidates to help report these areas and use these tools.
Anne, can I make a comment?
Sure.
Sure.
First of all, what you were saying about the garlic mustard and the chemicals in the soil, I thought I'd read that they experienced out east that a lot of the plants are becoming more tolerant of those chemicals, that the garlic mustard. And then the Thistle seems to have exploded in about the last 2 or 3 years. I used to go to work 40 years ago, and there was a big stand of Thistle on Highway 18 near Wales. I don't know if you're familiar with that area. And it just sat there. It was always like, it was like 100 yards of Thistle, and it never expanded. And the last 2 years, it is on the other side of the road, and it's expanded along, it's just exploded. So I think the warming and the moisture have really helped.
Yeah, I think certainly both of those things can help a lot of the invasive plant spread. And along roadsides, it can really depend on how that right-of-way is being managed, particularly if it's being mowed. The right-of-way managers are in a really tough position. They, like most other people who are managing any sort of vegetation, don't have enough staff or funding to really do what they'd like to do and what they know they should do. But unfortunately, so that might mean in a county, for instance, they're managing the county roads, they're managing the state highways, that's a lot of miles. Maybe they only have 1 or 2 mowers to cover all of the rights of way in the whole county. And so as much as us invasive plant people say, oh, you've got to mow at the right time, mow before those plants set seed, they literally can't, because that's maybe a 2-week window where they have for optimal mowing, and that's just not enough time to get the mower across that many miles of road. And so in the case of that Thistle, I'd be really curious. I mean, we might not have any way of knowing now, but it might be a situation where they were able to mow it kind of at the right time for a few years, and then one year they hit it too late, and that seed spread even more because of the mowers. I will say my group and several other kind of extension educators across the state, and some of our nonprofits and even private companies have been coming together to work on roadside invasive plant management in the past few years. And there are a lot of county and municipal highway departments that are really stepping up and doing their best and getting, like, really fighting to get more money in their budget to manage things like wild parsnip and Thistle. But efforts from community members can help that a lot too. So I think I briefly mentioned wild parsnip earlier in the town. It was in the town of Kinnickinnick, which is in St. Croix County in western Wisconsin. And I think the town recognized that wild parsnip was a problem, and most of you are probably familiar, but the sap causes burns on your skin. So it's a real concern in parks, but certainly we don't want it spreading on roadsides either. And they were just going to broadcast spray herbicide across all of the miles of road in the town, which would have fixed the problem of the parsnip, but obviously that's not necessarily the most responsible use of herbicide. And so the local master gardeners are like, hey, we can do something about this. And so they walked the roads and mapped where the parsnip actually was, and realized or could show the town board basically that less than 5% of the roadways were actually infested with parsnip. So there was no reason to be broadcast spraying across all of those miles. And so that was a really successful volunteer-led project where the volunteers had some skin in the game. They said, we know this is a problem, we're not happy with the management, but we're going to provide some information. And they actually also volunteered to kind of hand manage the really low population areas of parsnip. And then the town only had to spray a few of the really big unmanageable patches. So yeah, we got lots of work on roadsides, but lots of ways for volunteers to get involved in that if that's an issue that bothers you while you're seeing these populations spreading.
I think it's
Really
not only
detective.
mowing. I think it's also, sorry, it's also in wintertime when the plows go through, they're collecting seed as they go along and it gets flung into fields or people's yards. But
Yep,
anyway,
certainly. Yep, that's definitely another way that it can spread too. You're right. Great. So I do see there's one question. Somebody was wondering about treating Canada thistle right now. Canada thistle is such a tricky one because it has those deep tap roots and it spreads rhizomatically. I'm going to put the WFDN website in the chat box, so maybe you can copy and paste it into your own computer, but we have a series of fact sheets for different invasive plants, and so off the top of my head, I don't feel comfortable giving a specific recommendation for Canada thistle at the moment, but on our homepage, on that right-hand side, there's a link to where you can access the fact sheets and videos. So you could read the Canada thistle sheet. But generally, because of those deep tap roots and the rhizomatic spread, if you want to actually eradicate Canada thistle, unless you're dealing with like a pretty small patch of it in your yard, you're probably going to be looking at herbicide as an option. And if that's the case, the fact sheet would have specific recommendations for what you would use to treat those rosettes in the fall. Otherwise, repeated digging and hand pulling in those smaller patches will keep it under control. It's just a lot of work, but if you've got a relatively small patch, you can deal with that. Like I have a 20 foot by 20 foot community garden plot, and there's Canada thistle all around because neighbors aren't really managing it. But like in that small of an area, I can hand pull it and keep it at bay in my plot. And so I wouldn't even consider herbicide at all for that. Happy to take any other questions too, whether you feel like just saying them out loud or typing them. Either way works for me.
And this is Greg.
Hi, Greg.
Hi, quick question. I have maybe a moderate infestation of glossy buckthorn in kind of a seasonal wetland area. Some of them are kind of like in clumps. Should I be treating glossy buckthorn the same way that with the urgency that I would treat common buckthorn on highland areas?
Yeah, I would say so. And those buckthorns, they're funny because people will say like typically the common buckthorn grows in more upland and the glossy buckthorn grows in more lowland or wet areas. And really they both grow everywhere. And it just seems like, I know in central Wisconsin, Stevens Point area, there's just like walls of glossy buckthorn. Down here in southern Wisconsin, we seem to get more of the common buckthorn. But glossy buckthorn certainly has the ability to become just as bad as the common buckthorn. So I would say I would treat them equally in terms of the urgency for managing them.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
and this is Meredith again. We live on a lake. It's a family farm for more than 100 years. And next door, a landscaper planted yellow iris. And have you had any experience with that? Because it started spreading and I tried to control it, but now it's got away from me. But I'm talking to the owner and trying to get them to remove it.
Yeah, so I don't have personal experience managing it. I tend to personally work more on like strictly terrestrial species and not as much of those ones that like their feet wet, like the yellow iris does. But if you did grab my email, I know that there's a lot of it kind of in and around the UW-Madison Arboretum, and so they were working on managing it this year. And if I recall correctly, I was part of some email conversations that were going back and forth amongst people that have been managing it. So if you were able to grab my email, if you're able to get it from Lisa later, feel free to email me and I can dig up that information and share what I have, which might not be a lot, but yeah.
Great, thank you, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just to go back to the teasel question that Mary Ellen had, Mary Ellen, it's like, it looks like a thistle, like a dried seed pod. Some people find it interesting. I went to REI one year and they have a rain garden, and I thought, that's great, I loved it. All of a sudden one year, there's all teasel growing in it. I went in and said, hey, do you guys realize what you have there? And they had no clue. They had like pictures of it because it looks cool and all that.
Yeah.
So just look for that, you know, dried seed pod. That is really a good identifier for it, especially
And
now.
I'll share my screen really quickly so I can show a picture. This is that EdMaps
Oh.
website again.
To me, it looks like a candle.
Like a candle.
So this is a really close up of the flower head. So it's very egg shaped and egg sized, but very, very spiky. And then you can see the dead stems, like even this time of year, but it has these opposite leaves and pretty spiky stems, but they're brown this time of year, but it's got that very distinct spiky flower head.
Yeah.
The dried flower arrangement, people love it.
Yes.
They do, and
Our arrangements.
we do still see people at farmers markets with dried flower arrangements, and there are folks at DNR that are specifically working on educating people in those settings about the use of invasive plants. So things like the teasel or the invasive bittersweet. This time of year we see a lot of bittersweet in decorations. Sometimes that invasive bittersweet sneaks in there. So.
And I've seen tansy up north and sometimes as a garden plant, but I saw one on the roadside recently. I sprayed it, but then just a few days later, the mowers came through, so I'm not sure if I got it. But is tansy spreading south?
It is, and that's one of our, I'll call it an unusual plant for Wisconsin, in that most of our invasive plants in Wisconsin start in your neck of the woods in the southeast and then kind of move west and north from there. And I mean, you're getting it from Illinois and Ohio. It's kind of swinging around that southern end of Lake Michigan into Wisconsin. Tansy's a little different. That one is very widespread in northern Wisconsin and northern Minnesota, but it is spreading south, definitely.
Do you have a picture handy that you could show tansy, or am I putting you on the spot?
No, I can easily pull that up. So again, using this EdMaps website, it's a very handy
Now we're getting the demo
resource.
Yeah.
And they've got really great pictures on here. So this is the common tansy that we're talking about. Pretty distinct flower. It's got those kind of yellow button-shaped flowers, and the leaves have a very distinct smell as well. I grew up in northern Minnesota, and going down roadways in the fall, you can just smell the tansy.
Tansy is got rhizomes, right?
Yes, it does.
Oh, yeah.
And this is another one that you can see in the winter. So this is kind of probably around this time of year. It's got these brown seed heads, but the stems will stay upright through the winter too. So, you know, even if we have snow, it's one that's relatively easy to identify as a dead or dried plant.
This is fascinating. Thank you. This is really cool.
Yeah. Anybody other questions, or should we call it a wrap? And
I
thank
have
you
one
so
last
much.
question.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Where you had the fact sheets on which website was that, or could you go to that quickly, like for the Canada Thistle?
Yep, I typed the website in the chat box, and then I will show you exactly how to get this. So let me share my screen one more time. The magic of Zoom.
Yeah.
So it's our Wisconsin First Detector Network website. And then here on the right side of the page, you'll click on, I want to access fact sheets and ID videos. And then there's just this table. And so the videos are just like 2 to 3 minute YouTube videos that show somebody pointing out how to identify that plant. And then since somebody asked about Canada Thistle, we can pull up that fact sheet. You can get to the fact sheets from the Extension Learning Store website too. But basically the front page just gives you identification information, and then scrolling down, it'll give you all of the options for controlling, but it rates the effectiveness of it as well. So if I'm just looking at this removal option in the upper left-hand corner, it says it's 70 to 90% effective in season. So that basically means, like, if you go dig up all the Canada thistle you think you have right now, you've probably gotten 70 to 90% of it. And then next year, probably about 50% of it is going to resprout. And so it gives you kind of that when and how to do the different forms of management, the effectiveness, and then once you get into the herbicide or chemical control, it'll give you really specific recommendations for
Great.
when you should apply it and at what rate.
Good. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That is great. You know, timing is everything sometimes with control of invasives and not using things like chemicals, herbicides at the wrong time.
Right.
I see that happen in parks, a lot of people's yards, middle of summer when bumblebees and pollinators are in their peak. They're going out there with the good old Roundup, and yeah, timing couldn't be worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Well, Anne, thank you so much. This is a fascinating topic, and I think this
Very
will
helpful.
resonate with a lot of our members, as I said, who are out and about in nature and want to participate, you know, not feel helpless, like, okay, I'm pulling this stuff, but look at it down the roadway and look at it over here. You know, Mary Roth made a point of an area that just started with a small amount of Phragmites and is just blown up. And I've seen that in so many areas as well. So this gives us a vehicle to help, and it sure makes sense to find invasives early while it's still a manageable thing. You know, one question I did have, so in a person's yard, I have an acre and I have I've been removing invasives for a long time. So it sounds like the best thing is start with the smaller patches of invasives and then work your way to the big ones like the garlic mustard. Would that be kind of applicable to a person's yard, person's property?
And every situation is going to be a little different depending on exactly what's going on. But generally, yes, it's best to start, you know, if you have multiple species, start with the one that you have the least of. So partially to prevent it from becoming a problem, but also it just feels good to be like, okay, I took care of that species. It's off my list, right? And start with the smaller, what we kind of term satellite patches, or the outer edge of the infestation, and then work your way in as you're able to, like, the biggest, densest, meanest patch.
Yeah, this year garlic mustard just seemed to be in its prime glory. I don't know, I've never seen this much in my yard this year.
Yeah, it has its ups and downs, and it seems like more ups, more up years. But
yeah, well, I think Meredith hit on something that is important, you know, with climate change. I mean, our zone maps have changed so much that it's creating the right conditions for a lot of these invasives that would ordinarily be somewhat controlled by the climate, being a colder climate or, you know, a drier climate or whatever. So yeah, lots of ramifications there.
Yeah, and that makes me realize, I mean, we didn't really talk about specific species, but given that you all are presumably interested in plants and probably can identify a fair number of them, I will say, if you use Facebook, the Wisconsin First Detector Network has a Facebook page, and we post alerts about particular species. So that can be a good way to, number one, track kind of which invasives are good to look for at different times of year, but also learn about some of these newer species that are kind of a high priority for reporting. So if you can, you know, take a look at the little ID guides that we make, it might catch your eye, since I feel like if you're already a plant person, you can kind of recognize something that looks a little different better than people who never look at plants at all. So we also have a newsletter that that shares the same information if you're not a Facebook user but would be interested, and that you can sign up for from our website as well.
Great.
Yeah. Well,
To
I
me,
think
it's
go ahead,
amazing
Dana.
how many people do not know and cannot identify garlic mustard or the Thistle. My friend and I, we were cleaning out Mitchell Park, and people were asking, "What are you doing?" why are you out there? And we dug a lot of teasel out and educating them so they don't even know what, are not aware what an invasive plant is.
Yep, and that's, I mean, I think all of us are out there to educate, whether we're, promoting native plants or just letting people know that invasive plants are there and kind of why they're problematic. Lots of people still have a lot to learn, but that's okay. I mean, I certainly have a lot to learn about subjects that aren't plants, so.
Well, I have to give a shout out to Judy. She is like the teasel master. She has hand pulled so much teasel at Elmbrook Nature Park. Carolyn is working with Purple Loose Strife, the program with the bugs. So thank you, ladies, for the work you do, and for everyone, the work that you do in your yard when you're walking through the park. I mean, yeah, it's obviously a community effort that, you and your organization can do so much. The DNR can do so much, but, us getting out there and identifying, and if you can't do the backbreaking work of removing, this is a way to contribute to the control of these awful plants, to make room for the native.
I had a question, and that is, as I pull invasive species, especially garlic mustard, I was told to bundle them and mark them invasive species when I put them out in the trash. Anything updated in terms of getting rid of, or how we should properly dispose?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And like much of managing invasive plants, it's pretty species specific. For something like garlic mustard, if it's not flowering yet, it's fine actually just to leave it on the ground and it'll dry out and it'll be fine. If it is flowering though, even after you pull it, it still has the potential to develop viable seeds. And so that's why people are so careful about bagging it. In terms of marking it as invasive plants, I have yet to see a garbage collector, particularly if you're in a more urban area, question whether the plants in your garbage bag are invasive or not. But
mine did.
Right, so sometimes it happens, but basically in Wisconsin, it is legal for you to bag and landfill any of those species that are on the regulated list. And so just to be sure, you can mark it as invasive plants, and then if your garbage collection company or municipality or township, whatever, is questioning, now you know that if it's a regulated plant in Wisconsin, you can legally bag it and landfill it.
I feel like
I actually called the town and they hooked me up with the garbage control, the company that they hire. And yeah, they got the word out to the person or people that pick up my garbage that you can take that. The collectors just didn't know that and thought I was, throwing out all my yard scraps. So yeah.
I don't know how other people do it, but ours expects you to put it in a clear plastic bag so that they can see what is in the bag.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I heard that as well. And I thought I read someplace that some things are supposed to be in a black bag and other things in a clear bag. So
there might be conflicting information, because
maybe.
putting it in a black bag will help basically render the seeds inviable, because it'll heat it up, and basically solar radiation will kind of get the seeds hot enough to kill it. So that might be more on the controlling it side of things than the disposal regulation side of things. So yeah, I would say if you're uncertain, double check with whoever
check with your local, if you're in the town of whatever, or the city of Pewaukee has a dump site, and you can take, if your garbage is full or whatever, they're open on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and you can take it and they will put it in their dumpster. So check with your local dump site that, will take yard waste and all the other things, and they will probably have a specific way that you can dump things, that you don't have to put it in your garbage can. You can put it in their dumpster, but check either online, or if you go to your local dump for your municipality, check and see what they will take. And then you don't have to fill up your garbage cans and stuff like that. So try that.
Great suggestion.
All right.
Well, Anne, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. This was very educational and motivational, and hopefully we'll get some volunteers. I know that I will be going to the website. Great tools, great
Absolutely.
tools for identification and information. So thank you very much for spending time with us tonight. And thanks everyone that is on the meeting, and also people that tune in later. You know, that's the beauty of Zoom. If you can't make it at this time, you can check it out later. You don't have to just totally miss it. So I guess with that, good night, everyone. Have a good rest of the month, and complete your survey for the seed and treat exchange, please, and so that we can get that together and organized, okay? All right. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Ann.